and welcome to another episode of Gov Tech Today, where we aim to bridge the gap between .com and .gov. I'm your host, Jen Saha. Today we have an excellent private sector partner here on our podcast, Dan Kent. So Dan has been a leading technologist for some of the biggest names in government cybersecurity, currently with Cloudflare as their field CTO. But Dan, why don't you tell us a little bit about your career path and what brings you here today?
Sure. Thanks, Jen. It's nice to meet you. Nice to meet everybody. Yeah, I've been in the working with public sector for quite a while now. I don't want to say how many years, but more than half my life. And I started with the military. So got out of the military, and like many of us, stay within that ecosystem, and went into high tech IT back with Nortel. Spent just 2 years there. Then I went to 15 years at Cisco, where I was their lead technologist. Spent a lot of time with public sector, worked a lot with the states and the federal government. In that time, I was a CTO for the public sector for the last 10 years. And after going to Cisco, I went to become CTO for a few companies in the last 6 years. One of them was IDEMIA, so I worked a lot with the states with their driver's license, as well as digital identity and digital driver's license initiatives that were going on. So I moved to Cloudflare here in the last 3 months. So I'm fairly new to Cloudflare. Very excited to be here. I look at Cloudflare as a way of uh, the next generation of Cisco. If you think about it, the infrastructure that Cisco built out in the 90s and 2000s, Cloudflare is building up that infrastructure and looking at the application side of how we can secure and create a better internet, help others create a better internet. And that's why I came to Cloudflare.
I love that sort of mission of sort of securing the internet, because it is such a big component of how everyone does their jobs every day, day in and day out. And I think it's sort of a little bit forgotten. Like, I know from like a public service delivery standpoint, to me, like a website being down is just as bad as having government be inaccessible to me. I know it's something that Cloudflare works on across the United States, and in a lot of governments, but sort of maybe what does that mean to you when you're talking about securing the internet? And what does it mean really to like a citizen on the ground?
Sure, it's a lot. It means a lot. And to your point, with the digitization of really everything, and obviously digital services within the state level, your face to the citizen is through the web. Oftentimes, if we do our jobs right, it's going to be more and more through the web. So therefore, it has to be secure. It has to be available. And so when we look at securing that environment, it really starts. I mean, let's start very first. When you do that search for your government agency, or your get a driver's license or getting a license for fishing, how do you even get there? And that really, let's start with the DNS. The very first thing a citizen talks to the government, so they don't have to know IP addresses, is to know what is the .gov site that they should go to. And that starts with DNS, which stands for Domain Naming Service. And it's really just, to simplify it, it is the telephone book for the internet. And so when I look at security, I start right there. And that's an area that we've been very focused on, working with the state of California, with many other states and the federal government to protect that phone book, because that is the first device that gets between the citizen and the government.
So actually, you mentioned California, and DNS in particular has been a really big legislative and policy focus here. And I think it goes back to what you guys work on, which is cybersecurity. So there was a law passed in California a year or so ago that actually requires, if I'm a government organization, a public sector organization, I must have a .gov email address. I must have a .gov domain on my website. Like, what do you think was sort of, and I know your company in particular was certainly behind this, but what do you think is sort of the driver for that? And like, what benefit do you think that has to like an average citizen like me?
Yeah, first and foremost, I think when you're talking to a .gov, you should have that trust in who you're talking with, right? And it's really hard to have 75 or 150 different domains that you could be talking to. If you don't do a .gov or ca.gov, you don't have that necessarily assurance that you're talking to the government. And unfortunately, in today's world, that's really important, and the bad guys are out there, and that happens. So by having started with the .gov, it's a way that the state of California or any government entity can really start to assure that the citizen that actually is talking with whom they think they're talking with, which is the government. And it starts with the DNS, and then we put some protection around a protected DNS where we're scanning and we're making sure that not only is the DNS functioning, but no one can come in and attack it and make it secure. So that all comes down to the citizen having trust in the government, which of course is the number one thing we try to do.
So let's talk a little bit about like the buzzword of the day, which is AI. Basically what you everything you guys are do relates to cybersecurity, and we've seen some really cool use cases of AI applications, specifically in the cybersecurity arena. So what are you sort of seeing out there as it relates to adoption of AI, maybe in governments and specifically in cybersecurity?
It's, I mean, it's more than a buzzword for sure. I hope everybody understands that. It clearly is it's our new transformation that we're going to see. It's, some people, you can't explain just how big it's going to be. It's going to impact pretty much everything that we do, certainly from an IT perspective, but well beyond that, right? I remember when cloud first came out, we said it's going to touch everything, and we're seeing it. It's touching a lot of things. Same thing when IoT came out. We said, hey, now IT is going to touch things that it never touched before: trains and planes and water systems. AI is similar. It's a foundational technology that's really going to touch pretty much everything we do. Now, that's greatness because it can help automate. It can help take the simple tasks and be given to the machine to do that. But it can also be used for nefarious reasons, and we're seeing that as well. So we have to leverage AI in our cybersecurity tools as well as protect our own sets leveraging AI and from because the bad guys also know this. So it makes for a cybersecurity challenge, but it is also one of the answers for cybersecurity. So that's kind of interesting in how we do that. So we work with a lot of customers, and how do we break that down? How do we, first of all, look at this AI thing? What does that mean for me from a CISO or CIO, and how do I protect my assets that I have from these AIs, whether it's phishing or whether it's the scanning of the internet to get information? So how do I protect? But then how do I also use AI to help me do my job better? How do I help it? And by the way, we've been using AI and cyber tools for a long time, right? Machine learning has been around. As I said, I worked for, after Cisco, I was a CTO for a company, and we used machine learning with fingerprint matching systems, facial recognition systems. But when I was at Cisco, we used AI with our cybersecurity from a anomaly detection, right? We've been doing it for decades. So it's taking that, but also using a newer version of generative AI to help it be more, I would say, simplified and easier to use with many other tools that we have. And we spend a lot of time with our customers understanding that and helping them build that journey to a successful AI environment.
So you have been in the industry for a long time, and it's something that we talk about on this podcast certainly is just that adoption rate and sort of the learning curve with some of these new technologies. My sort of go-to joke, and it's I wish it was a joke, is that like government technology is like 5 to 7 years behind the rest of the world, right? So even when it comes to cloud, like cloud was sexy in government like 3 or 4 years ago, the rest of everyone had figured it out, like, and, so AI, I think, is kind of the same thing, although, like, I'll throw something out there and get your reaction to it, because you're right, like, everyone's been using AI for, decades, if not longer. All of a sudden, it's the buzzword, adopted buzzword in government, right? Like, we have all these new terms and conditions, we have all these requirements, and it really, a lot of it relates to generative AI, which I love that we're differentiating. This isn't just AI that we really care about, it's generative AI, right? What are we producing with AI? What are the outcomes that we're looking at? But what have you sort of observed when it comes to adoption of AI as it relates to government versus like all of these other technologies? I'm interested to know what your sort of take
Correct.
on it is, because I sort of have some theories that we've kicked around as well.
I would say that the government has not missed the beat on this one. They clearly are adopting it. They're very concerned about the guardrails around AI. So they're limiting what agencies or groups can actually leverage with AI. But We're seeing AI in the form of chatbots be used in pretty much every state. A lot of local governments are doing it. Federal government is doing it. Natural language processing is being used to help translations. So we're seeing AI being used. Um, we might not be putting them into these major systems that the government use because obviously at that point risk outweighs the gain of the benefit in the short term until you can understand what the total risk is. So I think what I'm seeing, and I'm excited to see it, is the adoption of AI from a um, pilots and being able to test them out with real customers, real world, but in controlled settings. And it's just a matter of time before it gets into the major programs, major systems. But I understand why, because obviously the risk equation for a government agency is dramatically different than risk equation for a commercial entity.
You're
And
right.
so, return to risk is different. And so, but the way they deploy it in terms of, hey, let's try it for this use case, let's try it for that use case, let's get some customers and see if it works well. Make sure we can work on the guardrails. It's the right way to do it. You just don't want to slow down. You don't want to put the regulations to stop it for regulations. You want to slow it for regulations, and eventually the regulations should come up, catch up to it.
I think really the massive step forward that AI presents us with, whether it's in the private sector or in the government sector, is really forcing that adoption curve to speed up a lot, right? Like, hey, normally we would, do a POC and have this for 18 months. Let's throw it in a sandbox. Let's try it out now. Let's see if it works in 2 or 3 months instead. And I love that because it just means that government is able to take advantage of that much sooner. You really hit on something though that tells me that you do know what you're talking about and you've been in this industry for a long time, which is like just the risk aversion that government has in general. And I do think we're seeing a ton of guardrails right now. And the challenge is sort of like, how do you stay within those guardrails, but not hinder innovation in government, right? So that's always the tightrope that we all kind of walk.
Right. Right. And that's why I think call them micro modernization, right? Don't go for the big bang. Let's figure out how we can use it in very specific use cases, get it working real well, learn and understand what the issues are when we get it working in those. And eventually they'll get put into the larger programs, the larger systems that are doing many things, right? And you'll have a lot more experience at that point and understand a little bit more what's coming down, what to be concerned about.
So I want to talk a little bit about NASCIO every year, the National Association of State CIOs, rolls
Mhm.
out this top 10 list, right? It's our list of everything that we're focused on, top 10 policy and technology priorities,
Mhm.
straight from their members who are the 50 states. Number one, cybersecurity. I mean, I think it's been cybersecurity for as long as I've been working in this business. So that aligns really well to sort of what you guys are working on and sort of being that first line of defense as it relates to securing the internet. Some of the sort of movers and shakers, though, were seeing artificial intelligence, machine learning, and robotic process automation come in number two, which I think it's up one from the year before, but it's just that much more of a focus. When I looked at the list overall, I didn't see many surprises, but I did see something that made me a little nervous, and I'm sort of interested in your take on this.
Sure.
Number 2, AI. Yep, let's use it, this big shiny thing, it could change our lives. Number 4 was data management and analytics. And to me, this raised a couple of red flags. What was sort of your reaction to seeing this list?
I think, well, first of all, I agree with you. It's if you look going back the last 6 years, you don't see a lot of change. Right, it's very consistent. Um, I did that analysis and I wrote a little blog on it. And same thing you came up with but the way when I review what's going on with AI, it's not just because AI is the shiny thing. I do think it is the shiny thing, but it can impact about 60% of the other items on this list, right? It's certainly going to impact cybersecurity. We know that. It can make it better, it can make it worse, but it's going to impact it. It's going to impact digital services. We believe that. It's going to impact legacy modernization. It should be. RPA is purposely put in to help impact modernization. It's meant to impact the workforce. It can impact the workforce and make them more productive. It can impact cloud services and even accessibility it should be able to impact, which is natural language process. So I look at AI as it's not just its own thing; it's a foundational that's going to impact a lot of the priorities. So it needs to be right up there. Now, will it ever take over cybersecurity? I don't know because I think it's that risk that the government has to always have top in front. No one's ever going to get their name in the newspaper for doing an AI thing, but if they screw up the risk equation, they're going to have the name in the front page of the newspapers. I think that's probably one and two is probably the right place. The interesting thing about data management, data analytics, that's required to get AI in, right? So if you want to have a really good AI strategy and a really good rollout of AI, you have to know your data. You have to understand what is because AI is only as good as the data. And if you don't have clean data that has been uh, understood and worked through and cleansed, you can have AI that is bad AI. And we're seeing that. That's when you look at hallucinations with the standard language models we have today. It's because the data is either old or it's inaccurate. And without cleaning that data, you'll get hallucinations. And so you can do that on a public offering. But when you're building it for a government, or when you're building it pretty much for any enterprise, whether it's healthcare or manufacturing, you don't want it to have hallucinations. So we create uh, tools that don't do that, but it's all dependent on that data being clean. So I look at data and management data analytics as it has to be with AI because they're dependent. It's a dependency.
Well, and I like that. They are, I don't think that you're right. They shouldn't sort of be treated as separate issues. Like you can have one, but you can't have the other kind of thing when it comes to priorities because you're right when you talk about sort of AI being foundational to all these other boxes on this list. And it's almost like an umbrella, or you're right, like the foundation that
Um,
all of these other things are going to be able to be successful with, especially when it comes to cybersecurity, for instance. We're
sure.
seeing a ton. And I mean, that cybersecurity is like the number one use case for AI, at least in government settings, that I'm seeing most adopted today. So that's just super exciting. So,
Yeah, I think we just started to see it in the in combining with cyber. I think we only have really good things to come with that, right? Certainly anomaly detections are better now than they've ever been before, but you're now to be able to scale it beyond just the local network. You're using AI for to do threat analysis and threat detection, and you're using it to build better code, right? So now you can actually have code that is clean, secure code that you can leverage AI to review and then integrate into other areas of code. So I think it's exciting where it's going to go.
So you touched on this a little bit, and I want to highlight it again because we've talked before about our adversaries using AI. And if we're not using it, we're just falling that much more behind the bad guys, right? They have exponentially um, expanded their limits on how to just attack us. And DNS, you're right, great primary defense mechanism, first line of defense, but, we're seeing disrupting DNS server functionality. We're seeing redirecting of users to malicious sites. And we're seeing the adversaries use AI to just massively explode their abilities. What are you guys seeing as sort of our best chance at combating this use of AI by the bad guys?
Yeah, I think you have to. It's always going to happen. You have to acknowledge it and then put defenses in place to prevent it at the edge, right? So we have a way of stopping even domains or locations or like systems that have already come in and are known to be pushing out malware, known to be pushing out deep fake. We can stop that at the edge as just the first step. And that's where we want to go, right? We don't want to get all the way to California's border to stop it. I want to do it where it starts. I can do that if I have true threat intelligence that's been built up and it's updated on a regular basis, real time, so that I can stop that flow from happening. And so it starts there. Certainly, there's going to be newer technologies leveraging AI to find AI when you get down to the deep fakes and such. But there's a lot we can do at the infrastructure level from a cybersecurity perspective to stop it as soon as we know it, or to understand that these threat actors are out there and we can track um, their history and based on their history, we can make some decisions as close to them as possible. And I think that's where you start, right? I mean, the whole defense in depth, but think about it from when the defense in depth starts at their border and not your border.
I like that. So dumb it down a little bit for me because we aren't all field CTOs, and our listeners certainly aren't either. So when you say at the edge, like what does that mean to me? As maybe as like a state government employee, where are you stopping that, detecting that, sort of combating that, as opposed to not at the edge?
Well, if it's at, let's use a fictitious example of it might be on a country border, right? It could be on the border of Russia or Ukraine. Someone is doing something there, and that's where they are because that's where they can actually live, and they come up with it. And we are tracking all the time, and there's a lot of threat intelligence on where bad actors are. And of course, we have to stay on top of that because they change their locations. They use VPNs. They use tools that they can obfuscate themselves. But a lot of times they don't, right? And so we can get them as soon as we know that something is coming from this domain, this location. We can stop it right there. And you want to do that. You want to be able to leverage this global environment to stop things outside of even the United States if possible. That's where we want to stop it. If they come to your location, we certainly will stop it as well. But think of how much effort you now have to put in your location versus if we can already stop it before it gets to your location.
But
So
I think it's being a little more proactive, right? A little more offensive instead of just defensive, right?
I think it's defensive, but it's defensive where you no longer are stuck with your border. We're going to leverage our border, the internet border, let's say that, versus your state border.
I love it. I love it a lot. All right. So, last topic I want to hit on with you before I let you get back to doing the good work out there is just really what should I, as a state government employee, we have a lot of .gov employees that listen to the podcast. And, we hear a lot of stuff, audits, training, I should stay on top of these things, response planning, but what advice do you have for those guys who are like, I'm just trying to do my job. I got my .gov. What do I need to turn on? What do I need to be paying attention to sort of be able to focus on my main mission, which isn't necessarily keeping all the state's assets secure. It's just like delivering services.
Yeah, well, I think everybody should have that awareness that bad things are out there, bad guys are out there. You can't turn a blind eye toward it, right? You have to be aware, right? See something, say something, right? Well, let's start there. Everybody has some level of responsibility. Doesn't mean they need to be an expert, but I think what you want to stay on top of is uh, some of the big areas of concern are, you're now working in a world where it's not just in California, it's not just in Sacramento. Your world is the world, and so therefore you have to be thinking about if I hear things are out there, I read it in the local newspaper, it might impact me. Even if you just say it might impact me, let me call my IS, my security person, see if this is something I have to be worried about. If you're a developer, you clearly have part ownership in this scenario, right? So every developer should be thinking about security and what they can do to build more secure code. Because that's where a lot of this happens, right? If you look at most of the concern incidents that happen, it's either somebody has misconfigured something or something or in the code we missed something because it just wasn't a concern with the developers trying to fit in their mission. Like, but everybody has to understand that security is everybody's concern. Um, and yeah, it's really hard because I don't think everybody needs to read dark reading or do that, but I think it's really about knowing that your environment doesn't stop at your border. So if you see something, just ask your expert if you should be concerned about it. Because a lot of times they probably already have a solution for it, so you don't have to be concerned, but it's nice that you're thinking that way.
I love it. All right. See something, say something. That'll be sort of the theme here today. Well,
That's
Dan,
right.
thank you so much. This has been super insightful. Keep doing the great work that you guys are doing, and we'll see you out there.
Great. Thanks, Jen.